much for joining the Yes We Rise podcast. Really delighted and honored to have you here today. So thank you for joining. You've had tremendous influence on my own life and my own work professionally and personally, as well as many others. You've had a breadth and depth of experience many don't, from receiving 6 honorary doctorates, winning numerous awards, working in war-torn countries, being seized by the Ku Klux Klan. You've started several companies, written 8 books, spoken across the globe, and are the founder of both Project Drawdown and Project Regeneration, among many, many other things. Tell us what's occupying you these days. What parts of your story are still, is writing still such a central part of your book? Tell us a little bit about you.
Writing really is. It's the perfect job for an introvert. It's funny because when COVID started, and I had been traveling a lot, doing public speaking before COVID, and kind of ruining the footprint, doing offsets, but even 2x, 3x but didn't feel right. And COVID started, and then for 2 years I didn't travel at all, and I loved it, and and I'll never go back. That's it. I got cured, and if I never see an airplane again, it will be too soon. And so, so I'm writing, and I'm doing 2 things. One, I'm doing Project Regeneration, which we have a staff of about 10 or 12 people, I'm not sure even, and a lot of initiatives, things going on underneath that don't show yet, or don't show what our work is when it's fully manifested. We can talk about that if you want. And then I'm writing, don't laugh, or you can laugh because you have a beautiful laugh. I'm writing 3 books.
I saw that you were writing 1 with 3. You're going to bump it into the double digits of book numbers here soon. Tell us about these.
I knew you would laugh. Okay. My wife frowns, but you're laughing, so it's the same thing. Kind of different.
If my husband said he was writing 3 books, I don't know if I'd be laughing, but yes.
Exactly. But I'm writing them in sequence, though, so I just want to make that clear. And the first book is about 3/4 done. It's called The Book of Carbon, a love story. I'm not sure that will be the title at the end. It's only about 45,000 words. No pictures. It's thin. You can read it on in a couple hours. 3 hours, maybe 2 hours. So it's all 3 books are very, very concise, and what I'm going to try to do for the first time is actually put my first person in there, like to show up. If there's no I in Regeneration. It's 140,000 words.
I was looking for it, and congratulations on such an absolutely beautiful book. But I've been looking for your voice. I've been looking for, the authorship. I've been, so it's so fascinating that you say that, but it is such a fabulous book, and I look forward to diving into that. So you're coming into your next books more in the first.
Yeah, and the reason I'm doing that is because I'm reading other books by great science writers, Carl Zimmer, Ed Young, and David Quammen, and Isabella Tree. And they're there. They show up. They're talking about their experience and so forth. And I think part of me felt like somehow that was sort of egoistic or whatever. It's not about me, sort of thing, which is kind of passive ego, but in egoism. But I think what it is really is that we need to connect. And when I wrote Drawdown, when I wrote Regeneration, in both cases, I had a kind of mantra, and that mantra was to not try to change people's minds, and because you can't. It's not like I could I probably would if I could, but I can't, because I can't even change my own mind easily. And so it's sort of bizarre to think that I can change other people's minds. And I feel like a lot of the climate literature, there's a sort of a tacit narrative that is, I know you don't listen up. We're in trouble. and I don't argue with the facts or the intention or the sincerity of those books. I'm just saying is that, and with the case of Regeneration and Drawdown, it was more like creating conditions in which people could make up their own mind, as opposed to trying to say, look at, I know, and a priori, and if you read this, you'll know too. It sounds subtle, it's not subtle. And that was like why there was no I in there. The books are in 18 countries, and I don't know how that, I think 17 languages, and so they're translated, and they go they go out in the world. They have a life of their own, about which you have no control. And so, but these books, there's 3 of them, by the way. So there's the first one's the Book of Carbon, the next one is Making Starlight on Earth, and the third one is called Upstream. And Making Starlight on Earth is really, you probably saw all the announcements about fusion energy and the NIP facility and Livermore and all these breathless headlines. And with all due respect, they're complete bullshit. And that sounds a terrible thing for me to say. I've been studying fusion for 14 years. And fusion, that's why it's called Making Starlight on Earth. That's what fusion is. And the reason I say that about these announcements is that the NIF facility is really about nuclear weapons. It's in Livermore. It's just not far from here. And the idea was it produced net energy, like the biggest breakthrough ever in fusion after 60 years. It did not. And it took a 1.8 million joules of energy to produce 14 joules of energy. It's a ratio of 129,500 to 1. And the amount of energy it created was the same amount of energy in 9/10 of an ounce of Coca-Cola. So, I just felt like, whoa, everybody, just let's back off, So that's why I want to write Making Starlight, because I think fusion is going to happen. I think there's some amazing physicists and scientists out there, and some technologies that are just like rock, and that wasn't one of them, So that's why that book. And then Upstream is really that we keep trying to solve our problems at the point of inception. In other words, when we meet them, oh my gosh, what are we gonna do about this, and about opioid addiction? What are we gonna do about the amount of disease in this country? It's just it's out of control, really out of control. The amount of pharmaceuticals we take, our sick care system, which I call that, it's not a healthcare system, is eating up 20% of our GDP, and our food systems are intimately involved with that, because they're broken as well. And so to me, Upstream is about, can we go to source? Can we go to cause? Because where you have cause, you have a cure. And you don't have a cure if you end up pipe cleanup, which is, like you're trying to take out all the pollutants. If you're trying to clean up the oceans, out in the middle of the Pacific for plastic, good on you. I really mean that. But that isn't really going to solve the problem, So that's the third book. And the first one, Carbon, is really a book of carbon, is about falling in love with carbon and life, because they're synonymous. And I feel like, carbon's been demonized with decarbonization, there's carbon pollution, there's all these strange phrases around carbon, as if it's the cause, it's the perpetrator, we're the victim, we have to, deal with that. And all of that, Christine, has to do with kind of a way that the climate movement over time has evolved, and journalism especially, by the way, not so much of the science, but the science as well, as othering climate. We're othering, it's a problem, it's out there somewhere, we're going to fight and tackle and combat it, and and not seeing that the problem is here in the biosphere. That's what creates the atmosphere, and they're the same thing, and they're inseparable. And to try to bring it back home, but to do it with a sense of wonder and awe, like just to talk about life in a way that you go, wow, really, who knew? You have 120 billion carbon molecules in every cell of your body, every cell, and you have 40 trillion cells. Like, oh, it's like carbon, is basically diffused, is such a magical element, And so it's just a book about fascination and awe
Mm-hmm.
and beauty.
Mm.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. You know, the image that comes to my mind, I love that you brought in the sense of othering to some degree. I have on my family background, one side of my family, my grandfather was a coal miner. My great grandfather was a coal miner in southern West Virginia. The other side of my family, grandfather was a firefly scientist. Grandmother was started the first nursery school at Hopkins and eventually studied and worked with my grandfather. And they loved finding things in the natural world in their travels. And they brought back from Pennsylvania this beautiful shale fossil that's on our shelf now. There was such a sense of reverence for this shale fossil growing up. You know, the ferns, the plant life from eons ago embedded and made visible, and real sense of care, fascination, awe, and wonder for this carbon that's trapped in the soil. And yet, on my other side of my family, you know, when we looked at the coal that was mined, there was a very different relationship to the carbon in that form of seeing the visible coal. And yet, it's still carbon, it's still history, it's still earth, it's still, you know, parts of the earth. But the relationship to it was different, you know, means of putting food on the table, a means of discovery, means of exploring, you know. But yet you bring it back to relationship to some degree, and you bring it back to connection and to us, you know. And so to circle back around, developing a relationship with carbon, not othering carbon as something out there, but really what we can do in our own lives. What is really inspiring you these days around the work that people are doing? You talked about it a little bit at the beginning of our conversation about work upstream. Where are you seeing people come into relationship in a way that's creating meaningful work to solve the climate crisis in this generation, to come into deeper relationship with the earth and with each other? Where are you finding inspiration and momentum in this work around the globe?
That's a really great question. In several areas, one area just in youth. It's, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and youth are, I call them recent arrivals. And, you know,
I love it.
and and the world is dominated by people who are leaving soon, you know.
Mm.
So, and so there's this dynamic because, you know, if you just got here and then you know, just look around and read and hear and see, you going, what were you guys thinking? And that's really the right question.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think, you know, there's been no good answer to that, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
And that question is prevalent. And then on our campuses, you know, in the universities and colleges and schools, the polls show that 70% of students are depressed, anxious, worried, panicked. Half of them are reconsidering whether to get married or have a family at all if they do.
Mm-hmm.
And that has never been seen before. You know, I mean, that's very unusual. And part of the reason the students are responding that way because they're smart, they wouldn't be in these schools if they weren't, but they've chosen either a major or profession or both. And what they're having a hard time understanding is how that major profession, which they may get the degree in and they may get the job, but is going to make any difference at all in the world that they actually have been born into.
Right.
And so there's this gap, you know, between I'm being educated to do this and I'll do it well, you know, but it is it going to make any difference at all, you know,
Right.
to me and my family, and if I want to have children, to the idea that I should or could have children now.
Mm-hmm.
So that's number one. And I just see a great amount of activity going on. I mean, I'm not alone, of course, and just sort of a imaginative, you know, disruptive, brilliant, creative, innovative things that are happening, you know, on all levels of activity in terms of activism to art, you know, and everything in between. Um, so that's number one. Number two, I actually see in the business world two things happening. One is I see businesses who are trying to renew their social license, you know, which is what you kind of have to do, you know, if you're, uh, you know, to be seen as relevant and not as a troglodyte, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And they've been doing that for years with sustainability and this, that, and so forth. And, and they're trying to do that with regeneration and using the adjective regenerative this and regenerative that. Again, just the usurpation of the language and so forth. But there are also corporations where the CEOs, the he's or she's, actually have had a come to Jesus moment, so to speak, and actually they're moms and dads and aunts and uncles and sisters and brothers, and they have family, and they're get it. They see exactly where we are and what's happening, and find themselves through their, skills, the CEO of big companies. And they have a decision to make whether to leave and do something that, or to stay there and to try to transform that company into something that actually will make a difference, and not just committing to net zero in the future, but actually hands-on day to day to pivot the company in a way that makes it relevant to a future that is livable and kind to people on the earth. And so those exist as well. So I see in the commercial area both, people basically, exploiting people's concerns, and I see people deeply moved and touched by it, and then trying to figure out how to make their company relevant and regenerative. And regenerative to me means the heart of regeneration is to make life the center of every act and decision, and then to look at their supply chains and their products and their processes and the very ingredients they use, if they're in food, how are they made and what's their effect, and are they all extractive, which is basically pretty much 99% of the economy, and they probably are. And so the question is, how can we pivot to activities in manufacturing that actually create more life instead of less? And, I think that it's interesting. We have to be careful. I think and I'll go back to coal. My great-great-grandfather was a miner as well. It was silver. It wasn't coal. It was in Colorado. It wasn't in West Virginia. But I feel like one of the real pivot points that we kind of, wish we hadn't happened was when Hillary Clinton was running against Trump and called coal miners, didn't call coal miners, but called his supporters deplorables. And I feel like if I was running for president then, or, I would have gone to West Virginia and Wyoming and other places where coal mining is concentrated and said, you and your families for generations have sacrificed your well-being and your health and poverty wages to fire up and energize and power this country. This country owes you an unending amount of gratitude and debt. And if I'm elected president, I will do everything I can to not only increase your well-being, but for your children's children, because this country owes you something. You're not deplorable, you're extraordinary. We should have just gratitude, instead of demonization. And I just felt like the climate movement is demonizing, and I get that, it makes sense, but the climate science is exquisite, but I wish they'd walked down the hall to the neurobiology and talked about neuroscience, because we're not going to change the world with blame and shame and threat and guilt, and as accurate as that might be from a relative point of view, people move to possibility. And so the beautiful thing that's going on right now, I think, is that people understand that the sort of pandering that happened, starting with BP and Ogilvy and Mather in 2001, about this is what you can do to, as an individual, like these individual decisions, individuating the problem and the cause, and you can ride a bike, and you can use cold water in your washing machine, and you can recycle this and all that stuff. All good things to do, but again, it was highly individuated, And then what happened is that then individuals kind of understood, well, I'll do that, or some did, or they care, but they knew it wasn't sufficient. Absolutely not sufficient to the task at hand. And then they looked to the conference of the parties, to, the country's politics, legislators, to enact things that would make a difference. And that really never has happened. I mean, virtually not at all. It has in some countries like Denmark and Norway and things like that, but not much. And the Conference of the Party has failed for 27 years, And and so what happened is I think people felt like, wow, and what they overlooked is what you're talking about, what you're referring to is what's happening on a community level, because that's where the action is. That's where agency is. That's where the changes need to be made in any case. And the point being is that what communities are doing, in my opinion, and what I see, and I think what you're registering as well, is they're making life better for people. Hello. That's what human beings want, and
Absolutely.
they don't want a message that says stop, less, don't, all these negative things, and so forth. They want actually to move to possibility.
Absolutely. I love that. The what possibility brings. And what I found, I stopped trying to convince anyone of anything years ago, a couple dozen years ago. It really
Yeah.
just looking at creating a space, really creating a space for people to come together, share their ideas, find tools and resources to make it happen. Because we firmly believe that, in our work in our firm, that resilience is built on the local ideas of local leaders, and that people are the best guides and advisors for their own lives. They are their own experts. But sometimes, especially when people are struggling to put food on the table, or have experienced, Paul, as you alluded to, that sense of othering over time, or really specific cultural degradation, cultural depression, cultural othering, so many isms at the community scale, it takes a different set of energy to come to the table to some degree. So absolutely agreeing that the collective is effective. The collective is far more effective, but even when you look out across the globe, either whether that's maybe in your own bioregion, community, or when you look more broadly, Paul, where are you finding inspiration at that community scale? What's allowing people to come to the table, especially when they're struggling or feeling despair? Like, what's lighting you up and what's really moving the needle?
Well, I think that the beautiful thing about communities, or even it can be cities, or communities, obviously towns or communities, the thing that unites us is far more important than what divides us. And we're so inured to the media, and whether it's social media, whether it's the press, whether it's news as it comes to us and so forth, which is, or just political advertisements themselves, it's always about division, other. And the thing about, when you talk to your neighbors, when you talk, and you realize, hey, we're in this together, and you start to really find those points of connection, that actually are bonding as opposed to separating. And to heal the world, to restore life on Earth, means to heal the profound disconnections that have arisen and that continue to grow, actually, and those and the disconnections are between each other, from people from each other, the disconnections that people have to the living world, to nature, and then the profound disconnections we've created in nature itself by how we have treated our forests, our grasslands, our waters, our oceans, our wetlands, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so really what community is that process of donning the sock of beauty. And and you do it, person by person and day by day and this and that. That's the real change. That's the real transformation. And that's what's inspiring me, is that sort of awakening, to the a sense of agency. And that's what I, emphasize in Regeneration. And then in Nexus, which is on our website, regeneration.org, we talk about, practices and techniques and solutions, to do address, climate. And but we do it with, on every level, like as a person, as a family, as a neighborhood, as a community, as a college, as a city, as a company, as a corporation, as a province, as a, all different levels of agency we have, and those are where we have respect, those where we have influence, those where we listen, which is probably the most important thing of all. And that's where change is happening and can be made. It seems slight compared to Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, or all these people flying in on their privates and having all these great meetings and dinners, and but it's not, it's where change, it's the only place change can happen. Just like the only way our bodies can change is cell by cell, it's not going to happen on TV. And so that's it's not only my inspiration, but I feel like it's emblematic of an awakening that's happening in the world that is not reported, because it seems just, well, yeah, that's happening over there. Well, yeah, that's happening over there. It doesn't make the news. It doesn't make headlines. And furthermore, as 90% of headlines, whether they're, whether it's on Twitter or whether it's on the New York Times or whether it's on some other form of social and so forth, is about, activating the amygdala, because the amygdala is, it's about fear, it's about threat. And that's what we read, that's what we hear, that's what we see. We just don't get the news of what's happening on the levels that you're inquiring about and that you're active in.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we're able to move into the prefrontal cortex and activate those creative parts of our brains and that thinking, we're able to come together. Can you walk us through a little bit, Paul? Well, two things. One, you've done a tremendous amount globally to elevate the awakening that's happening. Blessed Unrest is such a beautiful example of that. Where are these points of light around the globe? But moving from that fear-based place to a sense of what's possible is a process and does take time and repetition to build those neural networks. Walk us through a little bit about what that looks like in terms of the beautiful work with the Nexus, the personal action plan around how regeneration works. Where does a person engage? How do they start? What does that look like at a more human everyday level from your experience with regeneration or working with this broader awakening that's happening?
I think it starts even in a very simple way, actually. It starts by listening to yourself. It's very hard to listen when the world is shouting at you, and the world is shouting at us, and it's also speeding up. And so, the time available to us as people, as parents, as students, as, whatever, seems to be shrinking and contracting, where we don't have that. I think the one place to start is to go outside where you feel at peace, you feel safe in nature, and actually to just don't bring anything with you unless it's raining. You can bring some food if you want, but just actually listen to yourself. That was get away from all the things that are listening to you, so to speak, that is, extracting you, which is what Google, and the biggest extractive industry in the world is Google, by the way. It's not a coal company. And listen to yourself and just see what comes up. And take the time, maybe do it again and again and so forth. I feel like every person knows what they want to do, but they can't get away from the mishigas of daily life, to find that out. And so I think that's that listening part, to oneself is really, really crucial. Because why are we all here? We're at this point where civilization is on the verge of, in a relatively short time, 30, 40 years, of collapse. And so, well, why are you here? What's your role? What provides you a sense of meaning and purpose? I mean, all of us seek purpose and dignity in our lives, respect. And I think we don't feel like we're getting it, and we're not getting it for good reason, because we're embedded in institutions and things that forfend against that. And I think when you listen to yourself, you'll know what to do. It doesn't mean you change jobs. It doesn't mean you quit. It doesn't mean you drop out. it actually means you go into a sensibility that is very different than the one that you can barely escape on a day-to-day basis that's coming externally. And so I think that's, I mean, that to me is the very core of it. Um, and the thing about the science, which is good, by the way, is that we have to draw a line in our lives and say, wow, and respect the science, just like I was talking earlier about coal miners, total respect. But in the case of climate science, we have to draw a bright line too and say, beautiful. But we have to see the science as describing feedback from the planet to us. That is to say, we have to look at what's happening not as a, um, being victimized or as something that's bad, but it's actually feedback. And it is, I say we're being homeschooled by mother, by mom, our earth. And so the disruptions, and I'm not welcoming any suffering that anybody endures anywhere in the world. That's, people are suffering because of the changes in the weather and drought and heat and too much water and too little water, and the migrations that we see coming into our southern border are emblematic of that as well. But I do think that once we see the feedback as a gift, as an offering, as a teaching, as a nudge, like saying,
You
there's a
know.
there's a cause, and we can almost see the rate of changes being gentle as opposed to being, harsh. I mean, it is harsh when a cyclone hits the Philippines. Of course it's harsh, but I'm just saying overall, and that we're being guided. Every problem is a solution in disguise. And global warming is a problem for sure. It's a lack of climatic stability, relative climatic stability that we've had for 10,000 years up until the Anthropocene. And that's gone. And it's going to get worse and worse and worse and worse. And so that listening, to self, regardless of where your orientation is about coming into sync, with the reimagination, the restoration, and the regeneration of life on Earth, because it's the default mode of life. It's the default mode of a human being. It really is. Now, we've gone through a couple hundred years of doing the opposite, for sure, even 500 years when you consider 1419 and, the enslavement of indigenous people from Africa and Ghana, but basically in the last, couple centuries, we've learned really, really well how to take and harm and extract life. And so we're at this wonderful pivot point, where we say, what can I do to create more life in my, and more life doesn't just mean in the forest or the grassland or the farmland or the soil. It means in our bodies in terms of what we choose to eat. It means in our communities. It means in the cultures that we have disrespected or ignored or don't even know about that are right underneath our nose. It means respecting other people's ways of knowing, and that are different than ours. It means, our cities, our landscapes, where we, our buildings, how our children are educated and how they're protected or not protected. It goes on and on and on. Regeneration is all those things, it is the lens and the framework within which, we have a meaningful place in the world.
So beautifully said. So, what I hear, Paul, is really that listening first, listening to yourself, coming into relationship with yourself. I also heard, that to some degree, listening to different parts within yourself, and that we're getting feedback. And these are feedback loops sometimes that are very harmful in some places, and to not uh, welcome that, but to recognize them as feedback and the default mode of life is life, and to recognize, I love how you said coming into sync, restoration, regeneration. So once someone settles in, and it's not the default mode, as you said, of much of society now, which is extract, take, show, mask, filter, whatever that may be, to present something that might not be actually what's reflective of what someone's experiencing inside. And I also heard you say that it can happen at any biome, any environments, you know. But once someone's listening inside and really hearing what their own nudge is, what their own, here's how I fit into this broad equation, what have you found comes next often for people?
Find your allies.
How? I mean, you and I could talk about this, but I think, you talked earlier in the points of inspiration. I think you said 70% of students on college campuses are experiencing isolation. What does that look like? How do people find their allies? Where are allies? What do allies look like? What is it? Are people going to look exactly the same? Of course not, but where do people go?
Well, usually they're right under your nose and you didn't see them,
Mm-hmm.
but that's not always the case. But that's often the case. People ask me what's the single most important thing I can do, about regeneration and so forth. And that's an easy answer. It's food.
Mm-hmm.
And the food system is the number one emitter of greenhouse gases, the number one cause of damage to the world, to ecosystems, biomes, whether they be forest, fields, grasslands, farmlands, soil, or wetlands or oceans. It's food.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's something that we do 2-3 times a day, which is eat. And that eating is preceded by choice. And the choice means what, and then what are you eating? Why? Where did it come from? Who produced it? What did the people who produced it, what conditions were they working under? Were they being paid properly? Were they being treated properly? And whether the water, soil, and the ecosystem itself, how is that being treated? All that sort of stuff. So you're going upstream, basically to a cause, both for human health and ecological health, and atmospheric health. All three, and so. And what happens is no matter where you fall in that spectrum, of just eating complete ultra processed junk food, to being, privileged enough to have a farmer's market and great growers around you who actually are doing, a spectacular job at, producing food, that is healthy and, well cultured, it's, cultivated culture, agriculture, and respectful to pollinators, to birds, to soil, to place, to water, to runoff, all that sort of stuff. Wherever you fall in, that's where you want to go, and step by step, it has to be affordable. It can't be privileged, and so you're seeing that happening, and in food deserts, where people live where they can't even get good food, and you're seeing that people taking activity to bring food that is healthy and health giving, and in many cases traditional, to areas where it cannot happen, but then making that connection. We talked about that earlier, about reconnecting that moment when you and your family or your friends sit down and eat, to where it came from, and literally the people you're connecting to, and what are they doing, and what do they stand for, and so that is, again, those are your allies. I mean, it's like your allies are at the farmers market, for example, and meet them and greet them. They love to know you too, I mean, and they need customers, and they are vastly underpaid, by the way, and overworked, and they know it, but all the more reason for you to get to know them and patronize and connect and meet them on a weekly basis. And some of them will even take your food scraps, and put it back into the compost, I mean, and this is just, again, an emergent phenomenon, and I'm sure, you see it, everyone sees it now. And it's also just a time when we get together and see each other and meet each other, and there's nothing more joyous really than food on a daily basis, or can be. It's not always, and so I guess that's the first set of allies. If you belong to a church or a temple or a synagogue, there's another potential group of allies that are there that might be sitting next to you in the pew or something, but you didn't know it. Or it's a place where you are known, and you can say, listen, I would like to get together a group that is going to clean up the such and such creek, or bring in more grasslands, or get rid of the concrete in our schoolyards and put grass back there, because or deal with the plastic pollution in the city, and the fact that actually it's not being recycled at all, and even if it was, it wouldn't be recycled, it's just being burned. All the different things that you can start to do on a local level, where you notice it, you see it, and you think, you can make a difference, and so those allies are there, and they're acts of service, and your allies are naturally people who attend service. That's what it's called.
I love that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So listening internally, developing relationship with self, deepening relationship with place, whether that's in an urban backyard, um, rural area, growing it out, finding your allies. They can be under your nose. So as we get ready to wrap up, Paul, this beautiful conversation, I'm going to bring it to you a little bit and then bring it back out a little bit. So you talked about, sharing food, how food can be a joyous moment. One of the things that it's really taken me a long time, couple decades of this work, to realize that when I focus on the things that bring me joy, it gives me the energy to do the work in the world. And it took me a long time to kind of flip that on its head, to be in my body first, to listen to my body, to prioritize what brings me joy. And it's been a marker for me as I am in these beautiful conversations with people, to hear what brings them joy, what sustains them, for the work, whatever that looks like for people. So you tell us, just give us a little glimpse about what brings you joy.
Yeah, it's a really good observation. Because I mean, I was, altar boy in the Catholic Church, and I am steeped in guilt. I know guilt really well,
Mm.
and if you did the right thing, then you didn't have to be guilty.
You're absolved.
Like, how joyous is that? you know, and then if you screwed up, then you go, oh my God, dear Father, I have sinned, it's been 2 weeks since my last confession, and I've committed a venal sin, and I'm that's how, I mean, I was
Right.
just, and sometimes I would be there at the altar holding, the incense, or with my little costume and all that sort of stuff, learning Latin. And so it was not a joyous experience, frankly. And so for me, I mean, I find joy outside, and that's why whether it's the wild part outside or where I cultivate, where my garden, and I find it with everything that's outside with me. And like right now, I don't know if it's all year, but it just seems to be in the fall and so forth, that hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of black corvids, really, I mean, crows and ravens come to the end I'm looking out the window here, to the end of this canyon, this is very forested and so forth. And they're making this beautiful noise because they're all crying at the same time, and they're flying around and so forth. And, it is just majestic. I sometimes will record it and, send it to somebody and so forth. But it's like, it's community. They feel safer together, at night, instead of being, scattered all around, and it's just so beautiful to land on some trees and this and that, and they find their way, and eventually they're all there in the forest around me, and then it's quiet until morning. And in the morning they just take off, they don't make any noise. And I just feel like that community is what brings us joy. And it's a community of any scale, size. That one is with corvids, I mean, which I feel very connected to birds, for some reason, I just do. But so I find that being outside, and I think it goes back, you talked about, memories in childhood. I think that I don't think, I know that when I grew up, it really wasn't very good to be inside the house. It wasn't safe. It wasn't a good place to be. And so I went outside every moment I could, and then I felt safe outside. It was interesting. A lot of people have the opposite. They don't feel safe outside, they feel safe inside. But for me, and the thing about being outside, Christine, is that, I mean, you don't really know what's going on. I mean, even if you can name all the plants and the birds and animals and insects, you still don't know what's going on because science doesn't know what's going on yet. And so it is just a laboratory of curiosity, where you are joyous in not knowing as opposed to being a know-it-all, or like being a professional, being an expert, and which means you can be wrong or right. And when you're outside, there is no right. There is just beauty and majesty and community and intricacy and mystery and sacredness, And so you're inhaling it literally, by the way. And when you're outside, the plants are going, the microbial populations of plants that are being, aerosolized by the plants are going into your body and becoming your body. It's not just like it's not a concept. Okay. It is a physical activity. And the beautiful book by Ed Young, I Am Multitudes, describes this beautiful way in which we are inseparable from everything around us, each other as people, our pets, our trees, our plants, our, whatever around us. And that inseparability, is a balm in a world that is trying to separate us, and trying to disconnect us.
I love that connection. I had a fascinating experience. We planted a forest garden on the land that we steward. We have been blessed to be on about 10 years ago. And, very kind of ecological design oriented swales and pigs and subsoil on contour and, trees that I grafted. But the most unexpected blessing for me was a sense of coming into relationship with the land of and I haven't experienced that before. I grew up being outside in the woods all the time, but it was almost moving, Paul, into what you said, into not knowing. It was running through the woods or climbing a tree or doing something, but it was still I. And it flipped in this experience of creating this orchard to not knowing and to listening, and then entering relationship that had more reciprocity than I knew was possible. And it's just been this gift of being in relationship with the land, and it's been really tremendous. So I hear, I understand what you're saying about the connection and community, and when I move into not knowing, the gifts that emerge are remarkable, really. So
I mean, because of what you've done for the 10 years, I know that when you disturb or dig the soil, you're seeing mycelia, you're seeing those white, uh, fungal extensions, of, fungi, And writing the book of Carbon, one of the things I have done is talk to Toby Kears, who has the Society for the Production of Underground Networks, SPUN, I think that's SPUN, not SPUR. And then Merlin Sheldrake's book, Entanglement, and so forth. And I'm reading papers around that for this chapter, and one of the things that came out about 2 months ago is a paper by Adamaski at the Royal Society in London. And we know that the mycelial networks, like every plant has a million connections, one plant, a million connections to the hyphae, of the mycelia, invisible. You have to take a microscope to see it, and all million are actually transferring information and molecules, to one way or the other, both ways, it's transactional in a way that is so brilliant. Okay. That's one plant, that's a million connections. All right. However, or moreover, what Adamaski has done is have noticed, and has been noted, that there is electrical networks. There's electricity, happening very, very, very small, amounts, and so he made basically really, really tiny sensitive electrodes and so forth to track the electrical signals that was happening in these mycelial networks. And he published a paper, which is kind of shocking in a really wonderful way. And he said they have now discovered 50 words that are used by mycelial networks, and they
It's so great.
and sentences. And he said the morphological structure of these sentences is more complex than Indo-European languages. And it's like, and this is happening not like a slug, it's like boom, boom, boom. I mean, these communications are just like we are communicating. They're very quick and electric, in that sense, in the true sense of the word. And we are standing on it. That's underneath this. There's more life underneath this than what we see above. And so going back to the land, the land is talking to us, I mean, are we listening? That's up to us, I agree with you. There is this discovery, I think, that happens when you go to the same land and you see it over time. And you smell, see, and sense just these changes and qualities, that can be reduced to descriptions, I suppose, in terms of tilth and fertility and la. But actually, there's something transcendent about it as well, because it is a living system. It's not stuff, and it is alive, and in a way that we don't even pretend to understand as yet, if we ever will, by the way. And so, again, it's like when I said about going outside and listening. Well, go outside that's what you're doing for 10 years. I mean, you're listening. Maybe you're moving and planting and grafting and swaling and all that sort of stuff. But the same thing. You're actually listening to that. You're in a conversation, which is so beautiful.
Yeah, it's been a gift, an unexpected gift. Have you read The Secret Life of Plants?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So just reminded me of the communication. So getting ready to close. Key lessons learned, Paul, that you'd share out.
I would say to not beat yourself up.
I love that.
Like we're all imperfect. Nothing's ever good enough. Blah 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 blah. It's just like I look back. There's things I did in my life, jobs I did or enterprises I created, things like that. I look back, oh wow, I was wasting my time. And now I think, well, no, I wasn't. That's my learning process. That's my process to learn, and that was my pathway. And to honor that, that's what I mean by don't beat yourself up. I mean, it doesn't matter what you've done that is, that you wish you hadn't, you did. And you're gonna make mistakes in the future too. Welcome to planet Earth. Or welcome to being a human being, and so to really feel that acceptance, and grace and forgiveness, to self, and that I think provides the basis for understanding and compassion for the whole of the world and where we are right now, and to people who are doing things that are spectacularly harmful. And yet, people ask me about Donald Trump, and and I say, there's two ways to look at it. He's X, Y, Z, all the terrible things people say about him. So the way I look at him is he's talking about himself. Every single thing he says is he's actually describing himself.
And then the opportunity for compassion.
Absolutely, it's a man
be there.
Suffering. I've never seen somebody live so actively and publicly in what's called a Vajra hell in Buddhism, but he's living in hell. He has a hell world inside him. Express it, and so I just feel like that, don't be too hard on yourself or others for that matter, is really about developing that sense of connection, and understanding how we became who we are, how somebody else is becoming who they are, and how we really do cherish. End of the day, we cherish that experience of actually being connected, and conjoined, because that's how Homo sapiens became the dominant Homo. There's different Homos, and Homo sapiens were the ones who like to learn together and share together and work together. That's who we are.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And to go back to the, beautiful example of the birds, and then we rest, and then we come back
Yeah.
and go more.
Right.
So we'll include all the links to this beautiful conversation in the show notes and the episode webpage. Are there any other closing thoughts or reflections you'd like to share, Paul, or any ways that people can learn about your work that you'd like to share?
I would say go to the website, sign up for Waggle. Waggle is a weekly newsletter. Waggle is what the dance that scout bees do at the hive when they've discovered nectar, blossoming the trees or shrubs or bushes. And they go back to the hive and they do this dance that tells the other bees the direction to go to and how far it is.
Where to
And
go, which way to turn.
yeah, and so that's why we call it the waggle, which is, here, just like it goes out once a week and it's going to expand over time. So, so sign up for the waggle. You can always unsign up if you don't like it. And it's going to pretty soon include articles from outside Regeneration from our partner organizations all over the world. It's going to include videos and things like that. So it becomes almost a daily thing. You don't have to get it every day, of course, you get it once a week or whatever, but you go there and just really connect into this emergent movement that we first spoke about earlier in this session, and so forth, that's coming up all around the world and expressing itself in such beautiful and wonderful ways. And our job is just to go like this. It's not to point to us, but to provide a means where, these different communities, these different initiatives can connect to themselves, learn from each other. And well, what we need, we need to see things that are working. It makes us happy,
Sure does.
Yeah.
Sure does. And it gives us the juice to keep going and the juice to connect with others and the juice to also rest and tune in and listen to ourselves to bring that back out into the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Good.
Thank you so much for joining
Hard
the
to,
podcast today, Paul. It's been such a delight to speak with you. Thank you so much for
let's
all
talk
your
again.
wisdom.
Let's talk again soon when the book is done or something like that. There's more that we can talk about. I could
Yeah.
talk to you all day long.
Amen.
It's like what you're doing. I really appreciate it. I'm very
Yeah.
grateful.